Today I'm going to give you my first impressions on the brand new Tier 8 German battleship Prinz Rupprecht, or perhaps more accurately, the Tier 8 German battlecruiser Prinz Rupprecht. This is definitely an upgrade over the Tier 7 Xarkun, and it's probably one of the best secondary ships in the game. I'll give you a brief rundown of the stats, and then we'll talk about how it plays over the backdrop of this game, which I think gives a pretty good demonstration. So, keep in mind that when I did play this game, the Prinz Rupprecht was basically stock. I didn't have any of the upgrades as far as the hull, the gun upgrades, or the engine upgrades. So, as a consequence, I only had 59,200 hit points, which is a really shallow hit points pool base for a Tier 8 battleship. But once you get the hull upgrade, that number gets increased to 63,900 hit points, which is at least a little bit more and does improve your survivability aspects. Rupprecht also has 16-inch guns, much like the Xarkun, although it has 2 more for a total of 8, and these guns are fairly good. You'll see them do some nice things against a Worcester later, amongst other things. They seem to have pretty good penetration at range, and they're at least a little bit more accurate still than the guns on the main German battlecruiser line. They have absolutely no range when they're not upgraded, only 16.3. You get them up closer to 17 once you do have them upgraded. And the secondaries, well, it's got a lot of them. It's got 20 105mm secondaries and 12 150s. They both can range out to 11.4 kilometers if you build for it using the Porcupine skill on your commander, and Hipper as an inspiration, as well as the secondary mod. And then, of course, we have Torpedoes, and when the hull is fully upgraded, there are 4 torpedo launchers on either side of the ship. These torpedoes range out to 7.5 kilometers. They're incredibly slow at 56 knots, but they do hit quite hard with a 16K alpha strike. Maneuverability on this ship is likewise also quite good. It can achieve a top speed of 30 knots when the engine boost, or not the engine boost, when the engine upgrade is fitted onto the ship. I, of course, don't have that, so I can only achieve a top speed of 29.1 knots, and my rudder shift, 15.4 seconds, although that's reduced to somewhere in the 12-second range once you get the hull upgrade. Or, I'm sorry, no, it's worse than that. It's 17 seconds, and it's reduced to 15 seconds with the hull upgrade. Yeah, and then the concealment, that's really the last thing to talk about, and the concealment on this ship is fantastic. And I also misquoted the engine upgrade. The engine upgrade increases the speed to 32 knots, which is quite fast. But the concealment, 12.7 kilometers by sea using the concealment module, and Condo as an inspiration. And the concealment on this ship is important because, like the ships preceding it on the German battlecruiser line, the Prinz Rupprecht basically has no armor. The side armor and the deck armor, they're thick enough, of course, to ricochet the shells of the highest caliber battleships in the game, but the bow and stern, 27mm plating. The bow does have an icebreaker, though, but the icebreaker doesn't go up too high. I'd say it comes from the waterline and extends maybe a quarter of the way up the bow. So the schnoz, the 27mm schnoz, is quite vulnerable to any guns that can overmatch it, and those are guns 16 inches or larger. So if you get shot at a lot, it does feel like this thing really has no armor, and as a consequence, I think you want to build into the stealth. You can see now that I am conducting a push. Earlier, there was no real way to conduct that push because there was a DD over here. That DD has, however, retreated, and so there's nothing on this flank to spot me. The Worcester is hiding behind an island, and there's an Alaska hiding behind the island somewhere toward the right of the screen. So anytime this Worcester goes behind the island, There's nothing in line of sight to spot me, and I can push up much further, which is good because I've got a cruiser, a destroyer, and another battleship in tow. We're actually managing to secure this cap, with the Wooster being behind the island. He's forced to shoot at some of our teammates, and our goal is to get as close to him as possible so that we can finally take him out, either with a combination of the secondaries or the main guns. And the secondaries, by the way, they do get the improved penetration. The 150s can penetrate over 32 millimeters, and they also have improved accuracy. So I think they're amongst the most effective secondaries in the game. They are definitely something that you want to incorporate into your build, along with concealment and such, because your main guns, while they can do things like that to the Wooster, as you can see, pretty good, they're really not going to be your primary source of damage. You're going to want to combine them with the secondaries and the torpedoes whenever possible. And I think you want to build into the concealment just because of the lack of armor. You're really not going to be able to push in like one of the conventional T8 German battleships that have been in the game for a long time. Those have enough armor to really tank a lot of damage when they're pushing into one or even multiple enemies. This thing does not. If it starts getting focused, it is going to sink very, very quickly. So utilizing island cover and concealment is going to be quite important. But once you get into range to deal with ships with your secondaries and your main guns, you can absolutely shred them over time. There's no question about it. You just have to keep yourself alive, and that can be tricky. Usually it'll involve quite a bit of kiting and not pushing into superior enemy numbers. Anytime you try to do that, you are going to pay for doing it. But anytime you can guarantee a 1v1 versus any ship, even in Alaska, at legendary tier. Well, to be fair, that wasn't a 1v1. We had a lot of support from our teammates. But anytime you can guarantee a 1v1 with a battleship, a cruiser, whatever the case is, well, you can shred them quite easily. And you do, of course, have sonar to protect yourself from incoming torpedoes, which is quite nice. Damage controls, likewise, are the Russian damage controls in the limited amount, but the quick cooldown. You can see here that we have used 2 out of 3 of them already. I do think 3 is kind of a low number. I'd like to see some sort of commander skill where I could buff that to at least 4, if not 5, just 3 during the course of a battle. I think it seems like too little. Let me know what you think in the comments, but not good enough. I'd like to see a commander that has some of the same skills as the Russian battleship commanders. Meanwhile, this game is about half over. Teams are pretty even in terms of kills and almost in terms of points. We're ahead of the enemy team by about 30 points. Brutus is shaking his head. I think he thinks we're going to end this game in terrible defeat because the enemy is starting to flip Bravo. But we're about to get into Charlie as this cruiser that has gone down the channel on Two Brothers nearly is about to enter it. And if we can flip that, we should still be in good shape. At this point, we're pursuing the Conqueror, and we know there's 2 other battleships that were spotted somewhere near the Bravo flank. They may be coming back. They may be pushing toward Delta. At least one of them is, and the other one, well, it's not entirely clear yet, but spoiler alert, he is coming back. And we're going to have to utilize our concealment once again. I think in this sequence, you'll see just how, I suppose, non-existent the armor is, and I think that's probably going to lead a lot of people to say that this ship, and maybe this line in general, because it is so lightly armored, is not good, and I can sympathize with that. It's certainly not as robust as basically any other battleship. These are battle cruisers. They are very, very lightly armored indeed. So you have to be careful with them. You can't play them like conventional battleships. They're more like stealthy, really, really large cruisers with crazy secondaries, and that's sort of how they have to be treated. They just can't stand up to sustained focus fire. And you can see now, we've got a Musashi, and I think that is an Alabama, maybe, shooting at us. And Musashi was able to take away like 6k shooting into our angled side. The Alabama mostly missed, but he would have done some pretty good damage had he not. And the Musashi is broadside to us. We're chunking him a little bit with our AP, But these guns, even though they're more accurate, I would say, than the main line, they're just not accurate enough, not consistent enough to always punish broadsides. And so it really is a combination of the main gun power and the secondaries. We're starting to aim the secondaries at this Montana here. I think I called it a Massachusetts, who is also mostly broadside, and we're not going to get great results. Our 7.5 km torpedoes, we are going to launch them. They are very, very slow, but you can see now, as these secondaries start to make contact with Montana, they're actually doing damage when they hit, because they're capable of penetrating his armor. That's really significant. A lot of people do think secondaries are fairly useless in this game, and for the most part, those people are right, because by and large, secondaries, even on dedicated secondary battleships like the Bismarck, the GK, the Massachusetts even, they really don't have the penetration to penetrate anything other than destroyer hulls, superstructures, maybe even the lightest armored cruisers. But these secondaries on the Rupprecht, they can pen the 32mm bow armor of the Montana. They can maybe even penetrate his deck armor. I'm honestly not entirely sure. I do believe the 150s get the quarter caliber penetration on their HE, which I think means they should be able to penetrate 38mm of armor. And the Montana, if I'm not mistaken, does have 38mm of deck armor. So, yeah, a lot more effective than your typical secondaries. And if you can guarantee a 1v1 match, you can push in like some of the other German battle cruisers, like the Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, that kind of thing, like we did there against the Montana. Guaranteed 1v1. He could do a lot of chunk damage to us with his main guns, but he wasn't able to take us out, and we were able to take him out with a combination of our torpedoes, secondaries, and main guns. And that really is the key to this ship and this line. You want to make use of all your sources of damage, and you need to be careful. You need to only take 1v1 fights versus battleships. I think you really need to spec into concealment, and you need to be cautious and very deliberate about your positioning. Sometimes you can lead pushes like I did in this game, but the key to that is that there was no destroyer to spot me for a good amount of the time, and most of the enemy ships were hiding behind islands. Those are the kind of things that these battle cruisers excel at, those kind of stealthy situations where they can sneak up close to the enemy, get in secondary range, use their main guns, hopefully even their torpedoes, and the results can be quite good. This was a pretty average game, but keep in mind this was basically a completely stock Rupprecht. We end on the top of the leaderboard with 2600 base XP, so not a bad result at all. Let me know what you think in the comments, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.